And we are live.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Everyone coming in. We'll get started. We're about a minute before 11, so we'll just let everyone kind of trickle in and we'll get started momentarily. As a reminder, you can ask questions. We'll take questions towards the end. All right, since I try to stay on time and start on time and, keep things flowing, I'm going to start with an introduction of our amazing guests this morning or afternoon, depending on where you are in the country. Jasmine Crowe, she is a HBCU alumni who is working to make the world a better place by reducing food waste and ending hunger. She has hosted activations in more than 20 US cities and the UK, South Africa, and Haiti, and has collected and donated over 5 million items to causes worldwide, and has fed over 80,000 people through the Sunday Soul Homeless Feeding Initiative. Through her years of work feeding vulnerable populations, she has saw a great opportunity for technology to solve a real problem, hunger. In January 2017, she created and founded Goodr, a tech-enabled sustainable food waste management company with a goal to eliminate hunger and food waste. Under Jasmine's direction, Goodr has now diverted nearly 2 million pounds of food, which we already know that it's all these numbers, they've exceeded these numbers by now. But they've diverted over, I'm sure at this point, 2 million pounds of food from landfill and serves clients, including Atlanta's Hartsfield's Jackson Airport, the NFL, the Georgia World Congress Center, Netflix, and more. The mission of Goodr is simple: feed more, waste less. The company now operates in 6 cities and is growing with a goal to be in 20 cities by 2020. And so I know there are people on this call who are all across the US. And so if you see an opportunity for Goodr to come into your city, this is definitely open conversation as we look to expand the amazing work that they're doing. So I'd love to welcome Jasmine.
Thank you.
To Resilia, CEO of Office Hours. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
And we're excited to have you. And so I really want to start off because I had an opportunity to go back and rewatch your TED Talks, which Jasmine has over 2 million views. So y'all need to go check out her TED Talk. It's amazing. And you were talking about a food scarcity, and we use that word, food scarcity. Do you feel that we should essentially eliminate that word? Because to your point, the issue isn't that we don't have enough food. It's a issue of accessibility. So would love to just talk to you a little bit more about your thoughts around the terminology that's being used, how we use it, and how we understand it.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think the notion that we need to produce more food to feed the growing population is absolutely wrong. We are wasting about now I think that the statistic is about 74 billion pounds of edible surplus food. And this is, mind you, from businesses. So what we waste in our households, that number is about 116 billion pounds. So on average, every single American wastes about 250 pounds of food a year. So, you know, you go to the grocery store, you buy something, it sits in your refrigerator, it goes bad, you throw it away. So on average, we are all wasting about 250 pounds a year. But when you think about how much food goes to waste at the businesses that we support, and these are grocery stores, these are restaurants, these are convention centers, airports, you name it, hotels, that number is about literally 77 billion pounds of perfectly good food. So the idea that we don't have enough food to feed people is absolutely wrong. We have more than enough food. If we reduce food waste just by 15%, that would be enough food to feed 25 million hungry Americans. We have about 40 million that are going hungry right now. So there is, my whole thing is that hunger is not an issue of scarcity. It's a matter of logistics. And so what we've done at Goodr is we've built a network that connects surplus food with need in real time. And so, yeah, I really want to use the term scarcity.
Absolutely. And Jasmine, Peter just noted in our inbox that your audio is going in and out a little bit. I think it's because you may be low to some of the individuals on the presentation. I'm just seeing some of the comments. They're saying that your sound is going in and out a little bit. So I heard you perfectly earlier. So maybe it's because you're not close enough to the audio of the mic.
Okay, do you guys hear me now?
Yes, I hear. That's perfect. I'm not sure if that changed.
Closer.
Okay, perfect. Okay, great. Thank you. And so when we think about, I was listening to your stories I mentioned earlier on TED and where you started. You were doing this way back in 2013, and something you mentioned that really stood out to me is that you were trying to provide opportunity for people to dine with dignity. I would love to kind of hear about like just your history and how you got into this work.
Yeah, I drove through downtown Atlanta, and I just had moved here. So I moved to Atlanta in 2013. I always joke my sister was attending Spelman College, and for whatever reason, my dad was very fearful of her living. He just thought like, you got to get out there so, she doesn't get lost in the wind. And so I moved to Atlanta, not only just because she was attending Spelman, but really just to chase my dreams of being an entrepreneur. At the time I had a consultancy called Black Celebrity Giving. So I was working with Black celebrities. And as you know, Atlanta has a plethora. And so I was helping them really define their giving blueprint. I would start their nonprofits, help them with their board, help them define their programming, do their fundraising. I worked with a lot of people, and I'm very fortunate to have done that work and still dabble in it from time to time. But yeah, when I was driving through downtown Atlanta, I just saw hundreds of people that were homeless, and they, I felt like I needed to do something. I never know what made me decide I'm going to start feeding people, but for whatever reason, I just went home. I posted on Facebook, next weekend I'm going to go. I'm feeding downtown if you want to join me. And the idea was to call it Sunday Soul. And it was really just a mixture of like good old school music that you would hear on a Sunday afternoon and like that Sunday dinner that you would have. So just that was the idea. I'm going to bring soulful meals, soulful music, and feed people. And, I had done that for about 2.5 years before I decided to turn it into a pop-up restaurant. And I did that because honestly, I had people standing in line, waiting, and it was like a buffet style. So people would wait in line sometimes for 2 and 3 hours. And I just realized like I was doing it wrong. No one should stand up and, have to stand, eat standing up. And so I decided to change it, and I created what was called the Sunday Soul Pop-Up Restaurant, where I started renting tables and chairs and linens and getting flowers donated and actually printing out little menus and letting people feel like they were dining with dignity. But even before then, all of my meals always featured a lot of options. So I've had to talk to friends and family members who will say things like, oh, they're homeless. You can feed them anything. And I would say like, no, homelessness is a state. It's something that you're going through. You're not always going to be homeless. And just because you're experiencing homelessness, it doesn't mean that you don't have religious convictions. It doesn't mean that you don't have dietary restrictions. Why are we taking out the dignity in how we were feeding people? What we were doing largely was like, there were all these hashtag lunch bags. And I thought it was a really great movement, but we were giving people thousands of, we would get together and make 10,000 sandwiches and think, we're going to just go and give this to the homeless, but we don't eat sandwiches every day. like where's the dignity in giving people choices? And so we always had like a chicken option, a vegan option, no, we always had seafood options, beef.
Yes.
And that level of just giving people choices provided them with so much dignity. And I think people used to be like, well, what restaurant is this? And I was cooking everything. So the idea that people deserve to dine with dignity is still lost on a lot of people. But it's something that we've got to change. We've got to treat people how we want to be treated no matter what their situation is.
Absolutely. Amani said in the comments, love that initiative, see a problem, do something about it. And I think that is like really at the core of so much of the work that you do. And to a point that you just made is that we shouldn't look at homelessness as something that's permanent, right? Yeah. And we go out and we see things like, oh, well, that's just the way it is. Like, no, this shouldn't be the way it is.
Yeah, it shouldn't be. And we should always look to try and solve the problems. I think, one of the things that I'm very cognizant of in my role is that I actually really want to end hunger. I really want this to be something that doesn't exist, years from now. And so I always tell myself, like, if I work myself out of business, I'm happy about that. That means that I've created a system where people always have access to food and there's no one else to feed. But I think too often we really like pacify problems. And so we don't work to really solve them. We work to have temporary solutions. And so with Goodr, we're really trying to be a permanent solution to make sure that people always have access to food.
Now let's talk about, because I'm all about, and I love the way that you're utilizing technology and all these different aspects to be able to solve for hunger. And I do believe that it is not being solved for, right? Investor told you that, oh, someone's already doing that. Like, oh, COVID-19 has let us know that actually there's a lot that needs to be done, a lot less to do. But would love to hear you talk a little bit more about how you feel the old ways of solving for hunger is ineffective, right? And how you feel the future looks like, or where we're going. How can we do better? What is Goodr doing to solve for the future of hunger? And in many ways, to your point about food banks, are people essentially solving for hunger in a way? Oh, did we lose Jasmine? I think we might have lost her.
No, I'm here.
Oh, okay, great. How are we solving for hunger in a way that is proactive and future forward, right? And to your point about like food banks, are they really solving for hunger, right? Or are they just providing a service to the homeless?
Well, I think, if you watch that TED Talk and the way I started it, right, Sevetri, I spoke about being in this food bank and, being excited to volunteer, because really, if you know me, that's something that I've been doing for decades now. I've always been a servant leader. One of the things that I will say is that I was standing in this food bank and I'm like putting together, the food that we're going to give these families. And I just couldn't fathom what these families were going to actually eat with this food. Now, mind you, there's a line. I see people walking with their carts, but we're giving them things that just didn't go together. We were giving them peanut butter, essentially no jelly. I remember there was like a gallon of barbecue sauce, like a superhero shaped pasta. There was just all these things that just didn't go together. And that was what was, upsetting to me, because here we are, saying that we're ending hunger. We're providing, food to families, but we're really giving families food that's not going to provide them with meals. And so I think that's what's not being solved, right? And so when I first started Goodr, I was really about making sure that people had access to prepared meals. And so I really went after venues that had excess food, that when someone received it, they were going to get a meal. So my customer, profile looked like a convention center, looks like airports. So I was very focused on that. So, I realized that all of the prepackaged salads and sandwiches and those fruit cups and cheese platters in the airport, that those were going to waste on a daily basis. And I started thinking, like, if I could get those to shelters, if I could get those to families, what would that look like? And so that's really what I think drove me to be different. I do think that food banks and food pantries, they serve a purpose, but I do not think that they're being effective, because if they were, why are they not still meeting the need? So people, 40% of families will depend on a food bank any given time during the month in a large metropolitan city. And that's a lot, So I think it's not being done effectively. And I think what it is we're not willing to see a lot of change. I think I have to, really talk to so many of my customers and let them know, like, the way you've been doing it is wrong, and it feels good. I mean, how many of us have been to a grocery store and, they're like, do you want to, put your name on this hand and donate $5 to Food for All or Feeding America, all these different organizations. And then you'll see what they're donating. And a lot of times they'll have like a little display and it'll be like some peanut butter and noodles. And it's just something that your basket doesn't even look like. I think that's
right.
Stuff you're buying doesn't even, it doesn't even look like that. So I think we have a long way to go. But I think people have to be more forward thinking of what it looks like to actually solve hunger at scale. And then again, back to the dignity piece, you handing somebody a bag of like a gallon of barbecue sauce and Weight Watchers ding dongs and all this stuff that doesn't go together. What does that say to them? Like that, when you're a family and you're in need and that's your only recourse, maybe you've used your bus fare to go to this food bank and this food pantry to pick up food. And now you bring back to your kids, all this stuff that doesn't go together. And then what does that say to you? So I think that's why we really are so intentional, even with our grocery delivery program that we launched through COVID. We are very intentional on making sure that everything that we give families, they're going to be able to make meals from it. And that's just how we operate.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm just thinking about things that I've read where food banks have to throw away so much food because it was expired, right? It's like, oh my gosh, people are giving like their expired cans of food to food banks. Like you wouldn't eat that because you're giving it away in that instance because you're not going to eat it. And so going back to, as someone said, like dining with dignity, just having dignity around the food that you're giving to people, stuff that would be, as you mentioned, in your own food basket. We're going to get into COVID just in a few minutes, but you talk a lot about legislation around really freeing up the chains that impede you from going into, whether that's restaurants, schools, grocery stores, to get food and ensure that food isn't wasted. I think you talked about legislation like in Denmark and places, and I'm not sure if people are aware, but there are definitely like laws that prohibit grocery stores or restaurants in areas from giving their leftover food, which actually, in my, you could tell me more, Jasmine, increases food waste across the world.
Exactly. I mean, France and Italy are two of the countries that I really am like loving right now, because not only do they make it, fair and easy for these businesses to do it, they actually fine them if they don't donate their excess food, which is so perfect. And I mean, the law that they wrote is just so simple. Like, why are businesses wasting food when people are going hungry? And like, that was it. And so it was like, hey, it's not only can you not do it, it's illegal. And if you do it, you're going to get fined. And so now every occurrence that this business is found to have food in their dumpsters, they're going to get fined for it because people are going hungry. So that notion of like, no one in my country is going to go hungry, like my neighbor isn't going to go hungry, like that's really what I'm trying to get to. I think more cities, and I actually had spoke at, it's like a government, it was at X Prize last year. And I said, like, I'm looking for a city to say, I don't want anyone in my city going hungry. Like, just isn't that a great statistic? Like, we have the America's healthiest city, giving city. I mean, like, we should have a city that has the least amount of hunger. And I think that is like one of those things that just has to happen. I am really looking at more policy. I don't want to be seen as like a lobbyist because I just, it takes a lot of time to do that work. But absolutely, will that help me to get more food to more people? Absolutely. I am happy that a lot of states are starting to kind of adopt this policy, but it's kind of going to take some time. And so these are, states like New York, California are definitely saying like we need to reduce our food waste, because beyond just the fact that people go hungry, we have to realize that food waste has, dire impact on our environment. And I will be honest, before I started Goodr, I say this all the time, I wasn't like this environmentalist. Like I didn't understand, all of the impacts of just my daily choices on the planet. However, since I've started Goodr, I've really, I've dived and I've really researched that. And I now see myself as an environmentalist. I really look at, like, for myself, I only grocery shop by meal. Like, I know that seems very weird, but I don't go to the grocery store and buy groceries for a whole week, because I realized that I was wasting food myself. So now it's like, if I'm going to cook tonight, I'll go to the grocery store and I'm going to get what I'm going to get for that meal. And then I make myself, meal prep if I have extras for the rest of the week. or I will, really make ingredients for one or for two, now for three. But I really like to change my habits, if you will. And the reality is this food waste is the third leading cause of global climate change, and climate change is real. I'm pretty sure you guys have seen like what's going on with the wildfires in Oregon and California. I mean, these are all effects of climate change. And so really when this food waste goes to landfill, what it does is it produces methane gas. And now you have this harmful gas in the environment. So in the event that a wildfire or something like that does happen, now you have a natural gas in the air that's making that flourish and making that grow. And so that's the thing that people don't understand. This food waste that we're throwing away, it has a lot of impacts further on down the road. And so we've got to get it out of landfill.
Absolutely. I mean, we just dodged a hurricane, but when we look to the east of us, Alabama, Mississippi, they were impacted by a hurricane. So climate change, global warming, all these things, it's like so significant.
I can't stand these natural disasters. It's super sad.
Absolutely. But to your point, some of it is like human control. We have to do our part too, right? And so shifting a little bit, I see some questions, which we're going to get to after a few just questions and conversation around COVID-19 and its impact on your work. So we'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about the impact of COVID-19 on Goodr. And because I mentioned this earlier this morning, when everything was literally closing down in March, when people didn't know what was happening, one of the first organizations, one of the first companies that I saw just like immediately jump to action was Goodr. And so what feeling did you get like, oh, we have to go now? Like, okay, we know that we're distancing, we're trying to put all the proper protocols in place, but we have to help people. What made you feel like, oh, we have to do this now? And you were so far ahead of the wave of jumping into action.
I can't think, can you guys think that we've been in pandemic for 6 months? Like that is just, first of all, the time has just flown. Like, I can't believe it's been 6 months, but we were here in the office, we're watching the news conference. The governor is saying like, it's a state of emergency. And I'll never forget, it was first of all, Friday, March 13th. So it's Friday the 13th. So it's already like bad day, 100%. And really to be completely transparent, we were in a place with our business where we were trying to actually fundraise. And so many things were just going down. I remember like some of my investors were messaging, and I don't know if I always say like it was a BCC, but I'm always like, did they send that just to me or did they send that to everyone in the portfolio? But
they were panicking.
You may have to fire people, you may have to lay off people. This isn't going to be the time to fundraise. It was a very scary email to get in. It was a very scary time, to say the least. And so, I'm seeing these emails come from my investors. I'm realizing like, okay, I'm probably not going to be able to outreach to investors right now. And then at the same time, the same kind of businesses that I typically sell to are closing. But what I knew for sure is that people were going to go hungry. And, I knew that was my wheelhouse. I knew how to activate very quickly and how to serve people. And I've always had a very deep connection to communities. And I think that that's really important when you think of like who gets to solve these problems, who gets the funding, who gets the money. A lot of times it's not people that look like the people that are most affected by those problems. And so when you see the statistics on hunger and you hear all this stuff, a lot of people that are writing those statistics have never been hungry. They don't know what it's like to be sick and not have insurance, to be hungry and not have food, to have to do homework and not have electricity. And so I really felt like this is where you've got to really come in, and this is where you've got to really be the person that you were meant to be. So the very first thing I started thinking about was children. And I knew how many kids depended on free breakfast and free lunch at school every single day. And now you've got schools closing, parents that are out of work, and understood right away that I've got to work with school systems. And so our very first partnership was with Atlanta Public Schools. We literally were talking to them on Friday. We were in rotation with them on Monday. And it was simple. We were going to get all of the extra meals that they produce from their school sites, and we were going to start delivering them right into apartment complexes, churches, nonprofits, where now kids could walk to them. So that was our first kind of initial change. We then introduced a one-time pickup feature, which really skipped all of the onboarding for Goodr, which was something, we had a system like every company has a system how you onboard a customer. But for us, we were like, hey, listen, one-time pickups. Don't let food go to waste. If your business is going to close, too many people are going to go hungry, you know, reach out to Goodr. And so we got massive amounts of food just from that one call to action. And then from those food deliveries that we were doing with APS, we started getting a lot of email requests and a lot of phone calls, largely from social workers at these school districts. And they were saying, hey, I've got students that have nothing, that have no food at the house. The parents aren't working. Is there any way you guys can get food to them? And that's really what I thought, like, okay, maybe we can. I literally took a tweet to Twitter and I said, hey, I've got 17 families that are in desperate need of food. If anyone's willing to sponsor them, you know, Goodr will go and purchase groceries for them. And we ended up getting about maybe like $50,000 from Twitter, just from donations for people that wanted to support families. And we introduced almost a free grocery delivery service. So think for so many people, you know, if you got this huge bubble, about 161 million people to date now have had some kind of food delivery. Well, 140 million have not. And this is largely people that are unbanked, so they don't have debit cards or credit cards. They may live in food deserts where a lot of the food deliveries don't take place, or they could be non-technical. And so when you think of our senior citizens who during COVID were being deemed as the most vulnerable or being told to shelter in place, so many of them didn't have access to technology and they were going to miss out. And so we introduced a grocery delivery program and we started getting food directly to the doors of college students, families, and largely senior citizens. And it proved to be like a viable model for us that helped us really increase revenues, but also really serve a lot of people and really stay alive in a time where so many people were like, oh, you know, you guys may have to close because of coronavirus. And I saw a lot of my friends and personal family members lose businesses during these last 6 months, which is terrible. And it's been a tough time.
Absolutely. And I just want to say that I had the opportunity to work with Goodr when you all were in New Orleans. And it was just such an amazing, just like experience, and just reaffirmed everything you all are doing, your team is doing. I remember just walking up to the homes to drop off groceries, and they were like, wait, there's more? And they were just in awe and disbelief of just like the quality of food and just like the intent behind it.
Going to be able to actually make meals of the food. And that, you know, our pop-up grocery stores, right? That's been another thing. Now we've been doing pop-up grocery stores. I always tell people since we started, like our first ever pop-up grocery store with Goodr was in April of 2017, even though I started it in January. But when I first started Goodr, I had no funding. I didn't have the technology. I had a clickable prototype, but I was just trying to do the work and being in communities. So we were doing pop-up grocery stores all the time. And then obviously now through COVID, now we're like at almost 50 of them. So we've done a ton of pop-up grocery stores and, you know, bringing food directly to people in several cities. We had one in LA yesterday. We have one in Atlanta this Friday. We've done New Orleans. We've done Florida. So we're really trying to expand with these grocery stores, and it's been amazing. And we've worked with some great companies too.
Yes.
And you know what's really cool too, Sevetri? A lot of the companies have came to me and said, like, the way you're solving hunger is so unique. Like it's just been, you know, they're like, yeah, we've taken our team to the food bank and we've packed boxes, but like we've never like given food away to people. And like seeing that level of quality is just really important. Again, I just don't think that people understand how important that is to be served with dignity. And we continue to drop the ball on that too often.
Yes. And someone mentioned a while back in the chat, they're like, and Jasmine, you're Goodr, what you're doing is so effective. And that's just like what really stood out to me. Like, this is like working. Like, this is so effective model. And so I want to jump into a few questions. And so I have a question from Emil. He says, for churches and organizations who lead weekly and monthly giveaways, what's the best way to update their model to meet the needs?
Yeah, I think, you know, one of the things that we do, I've launched a program right now called Neighborhood Eats, and I am feeding kids on the weekends. It's something that we've launched a foundation for Goodr just because we're doing so much in the community. But what I really recommend is that you guys do an actual meal. I think that's just so much better. You know, if you guys are getting a lot of donations in, I think that's great, but try to the extent that you can, give away something that will make a meal. So even if that means you have to keep everything and keep a stockpile, than, try and get ground beef. The other thing that you can do is you can actually print out recipe cards. Goodr does that a lot. So a lot of times if we get like just, sometimes we'll have vegetables and pasta, and we will say, here's a recipe for a vegan, fresh summer pasta salad. Like letting people feel like, okay, I've got something here and I can make a meal out of whatever it is I got. It's just really critical. So recipe cards, prepared meals would be huge. Your best bet is to try and not just give somebody anything.
Absolutely. I love the idea of like recipe cards. Our next question is, have you ever approached some high-end restaurants regards to your work? And so like going, which I know you partner with restaurants, and even in addition to that question is like, what are the challenges that you face partnering with restaurants, or have they been really receptive?
Yeah, I mean, we technically, our ideal customer profile is not an individual restaurant. We like to go to a lot of restaurants in one location. So for Goodr, we like to go to convention centers. We like to go to airports. We like to go to, malls, places where we're going to get a ton of food in one location so that we can get a lot of food to multiple people. We haven't really approached a ton of high-end restaurants, but I will say, when we approach corporate cafeterias, the kind of food that we're getting for people is amazing, right? I always joke there was one time when we were first getting started, I wanted to see what it looked like on the other side. And so I would go to the shelters and kind of see them giving the food out. I remember one time this guy was like, oh, you guys are trying to kill me. And I was like, no, sir, it's just asparagus. And he had never had asparagus before. Often people have never had fruit outside of a cup and a vegetable outside of a can. And so for us to be able to introduce people to this really high level quality of food is amazing. And so we are looking to see how do we partner with more restaurant chains. But for right now, they've still got to be cluttered in a space where it makes sense for us.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned universities, but Tanya just made a note. She's like, a large number of college students residing on campus cannot afford their university's meal plans, much less healthy food choices. Exactly. And so I thought that was like, just like,
I talked to a lot of colleges. We were having some really good conversations with USC. So I think, that's probably a big thing for us, is trying to get like these college campuses on board. And again, I remember in college, I used to waste a ton of food. Like, again, this goes back to it. I'd have, I went to an HBCU, so I'd have tons and tons of food on my plate, and just feel like it was okay. But just thinking how much food goes to waste in a college cafeteria when, I think it was, you said, Tanya, to her point, so many students are going hungry, like right on campus. So we think that we're trying to create more programs around colleges as well. We've done some really good work with Georgia State here in getting food to their students. So again, through our grocery delivery program, we did serve a lot of college students. Morehouse College, when they first kind of went on a COVID break, they had a whole hotel of students that couldn't afford to go home. Goodr was very responsible for getting meals to them. So we have the ability to do meals and groceries. So we can do either one.
Absolutely. So I'm going to just ask two more questions, and we'd love to kind of just wrap up with kind of what you see for the future for Goodr, and some takeaways people can leave here with. And so this question is, does Goodr have a top 5 recipe reference sheet or something of that nature?
We don't have a top 5 recipe reference sheet. I mean, it's definitely something I think we can create. We have like actual recipe cards. I wish I had one like right around here, but they're actually like, we design them and we pass them out, and they look really cute. But yeah, we don't have like a top 5, but maybe we'll create one. But and so the chefs create them for us, and then we provide them to families.
Thank you for answering that. This question is, zooming out, is your team seeing broader impacts of COVID, the economy, on the supply chains that manufacture some of the food you distribute? What are you noticing?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Ken. We've seen a ton of surplus produce going to waste. It's getting better now because the productions have been scaled back. But right when the impact of COVID first started, so like March, April, where farmers already had so much stuff that was being produced, but now not being ordered or not being fulfilled, we saw a ton of waste. I think, Goodr, on an average day, we can pick up a truckload of produce on any given day that has, you know, sweet potatoes or peaches, lettuce that's gone bad. And of course we get that composted, or we have hog farms, and we're now starting to turn that into energy. So we have a lot of different opportunities of how we can take non-edible food. So we, you know, think of Goodr as food best friend, right? We never want to see food going in landfills. We get edible food, of course, for people that are hungry, and then anything that's non-edible, we have a lot of different channels for it to keep it out of landfill. But yeah, the supply chain has definitely been disrupted. You should see that in your grocery stores. Like pork and ground beef right now are a lot more expensive. So those are the things that we're seeing. You know, we see from a product standpoint, a lot of farmers really struggle, which is why so much of like the CARES Act funding, like billions, is going to farmers, because so much of farming is just really being impacted right now. Be it COVID, and also climate change too. There's a lot of stuff happening right now to farmers, and so we're working with a lot of them.
Yeah. And Jasmine, you went out a little bit at the end for me. I'm not sure if everyone else, but I want to ask this last question just because I think it ties in into like the call to action. And this is a question from Nicole, who is saying that she's the founder of Black Girls Cook, which teaches healthy cooking classes for adolescent girls of color. How can they partner with Goodr for a pop-up grocery store in Baltimore? And I think that leads into a greater conversation around how do others get Goodr to their cities? Because I know you're looking to reach at least 20 cities by the end of 2020, like true partnerships where you're coming in and making an impact to essentially end hunger in those cities.
Yeah, and so it's like our 20 by 2020 goal was a goal that we set in 2019, so prior to COVID. So we realized that we may or may not get there, although this year we've done activations, and we actually have expanded to about another 5 or 6 cities this year. But the best way to partner with Goodr is via partnerships at goodr.co. Our pop-up grocery stores do typically have a sponsor requirement. So we like to partner with like NBA teams, NFL teams. We really like to partner with people that are trying to make a real impact in their community, corporations. And then wherever we go, we always look for partners in that market. So we're never a company to just go into a market and just feel like, oh, we're just going to come here without making phone calls and trying to reach people. So if you do come to Baltimore, which is definitely a city we're trying to talk to right now, University of Maryland hospitals, and seeing what we could do in the city. Would love for you guys to reach out to us, and you can do one of our chef demos right at our pop-up. We used to have those a lot too, Nicole, but with COVID, I kind of scaled back on them. But we have a pop-up coming up on the 26th of September, and we're actually doing like Impossible Burger cookout. So we'll be giving people little Impossible Burgers to try. So yeah, I think we could definitely work that out if we come to Baltimore.
Thank you. And so there are a few call to actions there. If you are interested in bringing Goodr to your city, and we do have like a question of which cities are you currently in, but we can definitely follow up with everyone to let them know what cities you're currently in. But if you're looking to partner, you can definitely email partnerships@goodr.co. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And usually a sponsorship or a sponsor tied to that project is needed to come into the city. But I definitely think a lot of people are always thinking like, oh, how can we bring Goodr to us? Is there anything else that we did not talk about, Jasmine, that you want everyone to know, or anything that we missed on this conversation? I think we just had a very just like healthy and just well-rounded conversation, but did we miss anything or any final words you'd like to share with our audience?
Yeah, I really just want to encourage other social entrepreneurs to get started. When I started Goodr, so many people were like, oh, this doesn't make any sense. No one will ever pay for that. I don't think that's going to work. And I really, in the beginning, allowed those negative voices to really hinder me from getting started. I should have started in 2016 when I first had this idea. But because people told me, they didn't think it made sense, I held off on it. And the thing that I think is really important is that every single day that Goodr is in business, you know, people are eating because of it. And that is amazing. You know, I could have built a social network. I could have been all about people, you know, clicking on likes and sharing things, but I built an impactful business that is rooted in our success means more people eat. So, you know, the more revenue we make, are we a business? You know, we definitely are a B Corp. So we look at people as well as profits and as well as planet. But we do things differently. Like even, you know, our do-gooders that are just working at our pop-ups, we pay nobody less than $15 an hour. We try and move them up within 90 days. We have a lot of fun flex benefits for our employees. You know, we want to have ownership. We want to really be this company that believes in the power of social change. And, you know, had I not started, I just don't know, you know, if not for that, we've done almost 2 million meals since the start of COVID. And this was something that so many people told me would never work. So I think, you know, if you have an idea, just get started on it, especially if it's an idea that results in social change, because nobody ever loses for that.
Absolutely. No one ever loses for that, only win. And you really are making such a tremendous impact, not only in this country, but inspiring people all across the world. And, you know, if you're in social entrepreneurship, you're in social innovation, we all know that this is one of the hardest journeys to take, right? You could take a lot of other paths, but this is the path most rewarding. I want to thank Jasmine for coming on Resilia Office Hours and talking with me today. And I want to thank everyone who joined. We'll also be sharing this video to anyone who attended, and feel free to share it out to your network. Until next time, we want to wish Jasmine well off, and we look forward to having you here on the next conversation. Thanks, everyone.